I sat in my truck outside the funeral home, staring at the granite mailbox with my late wife's family name carved into it. And I told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself for 3 days. Something is wrong with your grandson-in-law. Trust the crack before it swallows the whole building. My name is Walter Pruitt. I'm 68 years old. I spent 35 years as a fire marshal in Columbus, Ohio, which means I've walked into more burned-out houses than I can count, and every single time, I could find the point of origin within an hour. Fire doesn't lie. It leaves a story behind, and if you know how to read the scorch marks, you know exactly where it started and exactly who's responsible. What I couldn't read, what no man my age can ever fully read, is his own family. My granddaughter Ellie was the last piece of my late wife Dorothy still walking this earth. Dorothy passed 4 years ago, breast cancer, and after that, Ellie moved in with me for a summer just so neither of us would have to sit in an empty house alone. She was 26 then. She's 30 now, and in 11 days, she was set to marry a man named Corbin Ashford. Corbin was charming in that particular way that makes old men like me nervous, the kind of charm that never runs out of gas, never has an awkward pause, never once forgets your name or your birthday or the name of your dead wife. He said he ran a private wealth consulting firm out of Charlotte. He drove a car that cost more than my house. He called me sir and shook my hand too firmly and looked me dead in the eye when he did it, which I've learned over 68 years is not always a sign of honesty. Sometimes it's a sign of rehearsal. But Ellie loved him, and when your granddaughter looks at a man the way Ellie looked at Corbin, you swallow every instinct screaming in your gut, because you'd rather be wrong about him than right and lose her trust forever. I was funding the wedding myself, Dorothy's life insurance, my pension, 35 years of careful saving. I didn't care. I wanted Ellie to have the day her mother never got to have, since my daughter, Ellie's mom, died in a car wreck when Ellie was 19. Ellie was all that was left of 2 women I loved more than my own life, and I was going to give her the best day I possibly could. That Thursday morning, 11 days before the wedding, I drove down to Redmond's Formal Wear on 3rd Street for my final suit fitting. Harlan Redmond had been fitting men in that shop for almost 30 years. He fitted me for Dorothy's funeral. He fitted me for my daughter's funeral. God rest her. He was closer to me than most of my own blood relatives at this point. And when I walked through his door that morning, the bell above it jingling the way it always did, I saw something in his face that stopped me cold before I'd even said hello. He was pale, sweating, even though the shop was cool. His hands were trembling as he came around the counter, and before I could ask him a single question, he grabbed my forearm hard, harder than a 70-something-year-old tailor should be able to grab anything, and pulled me toward the back fitting rooms. "Walter, listen to me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Get in here. Don't say a word. Don't make a sound. I need you to trust me right now more than you've ever trusted me in your life." I'm under him. I didn't understand. I opened my mouth to ask him what in God's name was going on, and he shoved me, actually shoved me, this frail man I'd known for 3 decades, into the back fitting room, the one with the dark curtain and the 3-way mirror, and he pulled that curtain shut and disappeared. I stood there in the half-dark, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out, listening to my own breath, completely lost. My first thought was that something had happened to Harlan. A stroke, maybe. My second thought, God help me, was that I was being robbed, and this was some strange way of hiding me from it. Then I heard the shop's front door open. The bell jingled again. 2 sets of footsteps on the old wood floor, and 2 voices I recognized instantly, because I'd have known them anywhere. It was Corbin, and beside him, his business partner, his cousin, Denise, who had flown in from Charlotte 2 weeks earlier to help coordinate the wedding logistics. They walked past my curtain and stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could hear the fabric of Corbin's jacket shift when he moved his arms, close enough that I stopped breathing entirely. Corbin's voice was different. Not the warm, easy voice he used at my kitchen table, the one that asked about my knees and my grandkids and my years on the fire department. This voice was flat, bored almost, cruel in a way that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. He told Denise they didn't need to bother picking up the groomsmen's vests today. He said the old man, meaning me, was so wrapped up in the wedding he wouldn't notice a single thing until it was far too late to matter. Denise laughed. A short, sharp laugh. The kind you use when something is funny because it's cruel, not because it's clever. She asked him if the paperwork with the venue's insurance writer had gone through yet. Corbin said it had. He said once Ellie signed the venue liability waiver, the one buried 30 pages deep in the wedding contract, the one I'd personally helped negotiate because I trusted the venue's owner from my old fire marshal days, it would also quietly transfer beneficiary rights on a $2 million life insurance policy Corbin had taken out on Ellie 4 months ago. A policy Ellie didn't even know existed, because Corbin had told her it was standard liability coverage for wedding vendors, and she trusted him enough not to read every single page. My hands went numb. I pressed myself flatter against the mahogany wall, my ear nearly touching the wood, praying my old knees wouldn't crack and give me away. Denise asked him about the boat, and that word alone, boat, sent ice straight down my spine, because I knew exactly which boat she meant. Corbin's uncle owned a lake house on Norris Lake, and Corbin had insisted that the honeymoon start with a private sunset cruise the night of the wedding. Just the two of us, away from everybody. Ellie, who couldn't swim past the shallow end of a pool, who'd nearly drowned as a child and hadn't set foot on open water since, had agreed because she didn't want to disappoint him. Corbin told Denise the currents on the north side of that lake near the old quarry were strong enough at night that nobody would ever question an accident. He said the Coast Guard report would write itself. Man overboard. Tried to save her. Couldn't reach her in time. Tragic accident. And then he laughed, that same terrible, easy laugh he used when he told jokes at my dinner table, and said within 18 months he'd have collected on the policy. Sold off her half of the art restoration studio she'd spent 6 years building, and moved on to the next one. Like Ellie was a chapter he was already halfway through finishing. I did not move. I did not breathe. 35 years of standing in burned-out buildings taught me how to hold perfectly still while everything around you is collapsing, and I used every ounce of that training right then, because if I had made one single sound, if that floor had creaked one time under my boot, I don't know what that man would have done to protect his secret. They talked for another 4 or 5 minutes. Logistics, dates. Denise mentioned something about a woman named Sabrina in Knoxville, a name I filed away and never let go of, and how it worked out clean the first time, which told me, with a certainty that turned my blood to concrete, that this was not Corbin's first wedding, and it was not going to be his first widow. When the bell finally jingled again, and the shop went quiet, Harlan came and unlocked my fitting room door. His face was gray. He looked at me like a man who'd just watched someone else's house burn down and hadn't been able to do a single thing about it. I didn't say a word to him. I just gripped his shoulder once, hard, the way you do with a man who just saved your family without knowing exactly how much, and I walked out that front door into the daylight like I was walking through a stranger's life. I got in my truck. I sat there for a long moment with both hands on the wheel, not turning the key, just staring at 3rd Street like it belonged to somebody else. 11 days. I had 11 days to save my granddaughter from a man who had already, by my count, done this once before. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I had no recording, no paper, nothing but an old man's word against a con artist's smile. And I knew in my bones that if I marched into Ellie's apartment and told her flat out that her fiancé was planning to drown her on a lake for insurance money, she would not believe me. She would think grief had finally cracked her grandfather's mind. She would defend him. And worse, she would tell him I knew. So I drove home instead of to her apartment, and I sat at my kitchen table until the sun went down, and I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I got out Dorothy's old photo albums, and I looked at pictures of my daughter as a little girl, and I let myself feel every bit of the rage a man is allowed to feel when someone threatens to take the only family he has left. To anybody watching this who's ever felt that same cold drop in your stomach when someone you love brings home a person who doesn't sit right with you, trust that feeling. It is not jealousy. It is not you being overprotective. Predators do not announce themselves. They bring flowers. They remember your birthday. They call you sir and shake your hand firmly and look you dead in the eye, because they have learned, better than most honest men ever will, exactly what trust is supposed to look like. If somebody in your family suddenly starts pulling away from you, if the dynamic around your dinner table changes overnight, do not be polite about it. Investigate. Ask the ugly questions. Gather your proof in silence before you ever say a word out loud. It is always better to be the villain in someone's story for a month than to be the man standing at their grave wishing you'd said something sooner. If this story is already making your chest tight, hit that like button, because it only gets heavier from here. And tell me, in the comments, what do we call you where you're from? friend, neighbor, brother. Because a story like this is easier to carry when we're carrying it together. The next morning, I called an old friend from the department. Reggie Calloway had retired from arson investigation 2 years before me, and after retirement, he'd gone private, doing background work for insurance companies and divorce attorneys. I met him at a diner off I-70, and I told him everything I'd heard through that fitting room wall, word for word, while my coffee went cold in front of me. Reggie didn't blink. He'd heard worse. He told me the first thing we needed was the policy itself. Proof it existed. Proof of the amount. Proof of when it was filed. Insurance policies leave paper trails even predators can't fully erase, he said. And if Corbin had done this before, in another state, under another woman's name, there would be a trail there too, buried but not gone. It took him 6 days. 6 days of me sitting across the dinner table from Corbin, passing him the mashed potatoes, listening to him talk about seating charts and cake flavors, watching him rest his hand on Ellie's shoulder like he owned her, and smiling the whole time like the fire marshal I used to be, the one who could stand in a house that was actively on fire and never once let his voice shake. 6 days of watching my granddaughter glow with a happiness that was built entirely on a lie, and having to let her keep glowing, because the moment I broke that lie open before I had proof, I would lose her faster than Corbin ever could. Reggie called me on a Wednesday night, 4 days before the wedding. He'd found it. A $2 million policy, taken out 4 months earlier, filed under a shell entity Corbin controlled through Denise's consulting firm, with a rider that activated the moment Ellie's signature hit the venue liability waiver exactly like they'd said in that fitting room. But that wasn't all he found. He found Sabrina Doyle, Knoxville, Tennessee, 29 years old at the time of her death, 18 months ago. Married to a man named Cole Ashworth, a name close enough to Corbin Ashford that it made my stomach turn, the same way you'd recognize a scar pattern on 2 different fires that were set by the same hand. Sabrina drowned during a private evening boat trip on a lake outside Knoxville. Her husband told the Coast Guard he'd tried to save her, but the current took her too fast. He collected $1.8 million 4 months later. He sold her half of a small design firm within the year, and then he vanished from Knoxville entirely. I sat in my kitchen holding that folder with hands that had gone completely steady, in the particular way your hands go steady right before you do something you've been waiting your whole life to do. 3 days before the wedding, I did the hardest thing I have ever done in 68 years of living. I did not go to Ellie. I went to Harlan. I asked him if he would let me use that same back-fitting room one more time. Only this time, I wasn't going to be the one hiding in the dark. 2 days before the wedding, I invited Corbin to Redmond's for what I told him was a final groom's party fitting my treat, my way of showing there were no hard feelings about how quiet I'd been lately. He came alone. Denise was tied up with the caterer, he said, smiling that same easy smile, shaking my hand too firmly, looking me dead in the eye. I let Harlan fit him for his vest while Reggie sat in the back office with a laptop, a folder, and a recorder running. And when Corbin stepped up onto the little wooden platform in front of the 3-way mirror, straightening his tie, admiring himself the way a man admires something he's certain he's already won, I asked him a question I'd been sitting on for 6 days. I asked him how Sabrina was doing these days. I watched his face in that mirror. I watched 30 years of careful practice crack down the middle in under 2 seconds, the same way a support beam gives way when the fire's already eaten through it, and nobody upstairs knows it yet. He turned around slowly. He asked me who Sabrina was, and his voice, for the first time since I'd met him, wasn't smooth at all. I told him I knew about the policy. I told him I knew about the lake, and the currents on the north side near the quarry, and the Coast Guard report that would have written itself. I told him I'd stood 4 feet away from him in a dark fitting room 8 days earlier and listened to him plan my granddaughter's death like he was ordering off a menu. He didn't confess. Men like Corbin never do. Not out loud. Not to your face. He laughed instead, a short, ugly laugh. Nothing like the one I'd heard through the wall, and told me I was a paranoid old man who'd lost his mind since his wife died, and that Ellie would never believe a word of it. That's when Reggie stepped out of the back office with the folder in his hand and the recorder still running, and told him Knox County Homicide would very much like to reopen Sabrina Doyle's file, given the new financial evidence connecting him to her policy under a previous legal name, and given a fresh $2 million policy filed on a second fiancé 18 months later. I have never in my life seen a man's face go the color that Corbin's face went in that mirror. He didn't run. There was nowhere to run. Harlan had locked the front door the moment Corbin stepped onto that platform, same as he'd locked it 8 days earlier to protect me. Corbin just stood there in his half-finished vest, staring at his own reflection like he didn't recognize the man in it anymore. While Reggie called the number he'd already given the Knoxville detective that morning, the wedding never happened, of course. Not the way it was supposed to. But 3 weeks later, I stood in that same little courtyard at the venue with Ellie. No white dress, no 100 guests. Just the two of us and Harlan and Reggie and a folder full of truth, and I told her everything, every word I'd heard through that wall, every day I'd sat across from Corbin, holding my rage behind my teeth, because I loved her too much to risk losing her before I had proof. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she put both arms around my neck the way she used to when she was 7 years old and scared of thunderstorms, and she cried into my shoulder until the courtyard lights came on, and she told me she didn't know how she was ever going to trust her own judgment about people again. I told her the truth. I told her it wasn't her judgment that failed. It was a man who had spent years perfecting exactly what trust is supposed to look like, and who had already practiced this exact lie on a woman in Knoxville who never got the chance to walk away from that lake. Corbin Ashford, Cole Ashworth, whatever name he goes by next, is currently sitting in a county jail awaiting extradition to Tennessee, where the Doyle family finally has a real chance at justice 18 months after they buried their daughter, believing it was an accident. Denise is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a lighter sentence, which tells you exactly what kind of family loyalty was holding that whole operation together in the first place. Ellie's rebuilding, slowly. She sold the wedding dress. She kept the ring, oddly enough, not out of sentiment, but because Reggie told her it might still be useful evidence. She comes by my house most Sundays now, and we sit at Dorothy's old kitchen table, and some nights we don't talk about any of it at all. We just sit there together, alive, which is more than Sabrina Doyle ever got the chance to be. I think about that fitting room a lot. The dark, the mahogany wall pressed against my ear, the sound of my own heartbeat trying to give me away. 35 years I spent reading buildings, learning to find the point of origin before the whole structure came down. I never once imagined the last fire I'd ever have to walk into would be my own family's, and that the only tool I'd need to survive it was the discipline to stand still in the dark and simply listen. If you've made it this far, I want you to do something for me. Not for the algorithm, not for the channel, for yourself. Call somebody in your family this week. A daughter, a granddaughter, a nephew, whoever it is that's been a little too quiet with you lately. Whoever's brought somebody new around that's made your gut go tight for reasons you can't quite explain. You don't have to accuse anybody of anything. Just call them. Just listen. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's an old man standing perfectly still in the dark, waiting for the truth to walk past him, so he can carry it out into the light before it's too late. Tell me down in the comments what we should call you. Friend or neighbor or something else entirely. Because I'd like to know who's sitting with me tonight. And if this story meant something to you, stay a while longer. I've got more of them to tell.